Imagine standing in the glittering halls of Versailles, surrounded by powdered wigs, silk gowns, and the suffocating stench of human waste, so thick you could taste it on your tongue. The European royal courts weren't just stages for political intrigue and deadly games of power. They were cesspools of filth, disease, and hygiene practices so revolting that even the rats in the walls probably questioned their life choices. We've been told countless stories of royal grandeur, of diamond-encrusted crowns, and gold-plated chambers, but what history books conveniently forget to mention is that beneath those layers of expensive perfume and face powder, the nobility of Europe were walking biological disasters. These weren't just people who occasionally skipped a bath. They were actively hostile to the very concept of cleanliness, turning their own bodies into festering experiments in decay while simultaneously believing themselves touched by divine right. Today, we repealing back the velvet curtains on the most disgusting royal hygiene practices that made medieval peasants look positively sanitary by comparison. Let's start with the French court under Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, who apparently believed that bathing was not just unnecessary, but actively dangerous to one's health. During his 72-year reign, Louis XIV is reported to have taken only 3 baths in his entire life, and those were performed under medical supervision, as though submerging oneself in water was akin to experimental surgery. The court physicians of the time genuinely believed that water opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body, which meant the aristocracy went years, sometimes decades, without proper washing. Instead, they would change their linen undergarments daily and call it cleanliness, as if a fresh shirt could somehow neutralize months of accumulated grime, sweat, and the particular musk that comes from never actually cleaning yourself. The servants at Versailles would spend hours each morning rubbing the nobles down with perfumed cloths, essentially dry cleaning human beings, while the actual dirt, dead skin, and God knows what else remained permanently embedded in the creases of their bodies. Marie Antoinette, that icon of luxury, reportedly wore the same chemise for weeks at a time, allowing it to absorb her body's secretions until the fabric could practically stand on its own. Her famous towering hairstyles, those architectural wonders that could reach 3 feet high, weren't washed for months and became breeding grounds for lice, fleas, and occasionally mice that would nest in the powdered scaffolding atop her head. Court ladies would carry tiny silver scratchers on chains around their necks, delicate instruments designed to reach through the layers of hair and scalp to relieve the constant itching from the infestation living in their coiffures. And when the itching became unbearable, they wouldn't wash their hair. Oh no, that would ruin the style. They would simply have more powder and pomade applied, essentially entombing the parasites in a fresh layer of scented paste. But the French weren't alone in their creative approaches to avoiding water. Queen Elizabeth I of England, the Virgin Queen, who ruled with an iron fist and commanded the respective nations, declared that she bathed once a month, whether she needed it or not, which contemporaries noted as an unusual commitment to cleanliness for the era. Most of her courtiers considered monthly bathing to be excessive vanity, preferring to go entire seasons without submitting to the supposed dangers of full-body immersion. Instead, they would powder their faces with a mixture of white lead and vinegar, creating a thick paste that would hide their complexion's imperfections while simultaneously poisoning their skin and causing it to rot from the inside out. The lead-based makeup would eat away at the flesh, creating sores and lesions that would then require more makeup to conceal, trapping these aristocrats in a vicious cycle of cosmetic self-destruction. Elizabeth herself suffered from smallpox in her youth and spent the rest of her life coating her scarred face in increasingly thick layers of this toxic paint, which not only disfigured her further, but likely contributed to her hair loss, forcing her to wear elaborate wigs made from the hair of common women and sometimes corpses. When she died, her ladies-in-waiting reportedly had to use knives to scrape away the accumulated layers of makeup. Some accounts suggest it was nearly an inch thick, revealing the ruined flesh beneath that had been hidden for decades. The Spanish court took things in an even darker direction, if that's possible. Spanish nobles in the 16th and 17th centuries believed that washing too frequently would remove the body's natural protective coating, leaving one vulnerable to the evil eye and demonic possession. They would go months without bathing, instead relying on dry rubbing with rough cloths, and the liberal application of perfumes made from animal musk, ambergris, and sometimes ground up pieces of mummified flesh, because apparently nothing says, "I smell fresh," quite like rubbing yourself with powdered corpses. The Spanish Inquisition added a religious dimension to the rejection of bathing, as frequent washing was associated with Moorish and Jewish customs, making cleanliness literally heretical. Being too clean could get you investigated for secret adherence to non-Christian practices, which meant that smelling like a medieval sewer became a sign of proper Catholic devotion. Spanish royalty would change their clothes regularly, but never their undergarments, believing that the linen absorbed evil humors from the body and that changing them too frequently would disrupt this protective function. King Philip II of Spain reportedly wore the same undergarments for 6 months straight, and when he finally changed them, the discarded items were so stiff with accumulated bodily fluids that they could stand upright on their own. His daughter, the Infanta Isabella Clara Eugenia, made a vow not to change her undergarments until the Spanish captured the city of Ostend from the Dutch siege that lasted 3 years, during which time her chemise went from white to a shade of brown-gray that witnesses described as the color of mud mixed with old blood. The physical spaces where European royalty lived were no less revolting than the bodies that inhabited them, transforming magnificent palaces into architectural monuments to human waste and biological decay. Versailles, that supposed pinnacle of refined civilization, had no bathrooms as we would understand them, no plumbing, no sewage system, no consideration whatsoever for where the thousands of courtiers, servants, and hangers-on were supposed to relieve themselves during their interminable days of political maneuvering and social climbing. The solution was elegantly simple and spectacularly disgusting. People just went wherever they happened to be standing at the moment. The hallways of Versailles became impromptu toilets, with nobles lifting their elaborate gowns and relieving themselves in corners, behind tapestries, on staircases, and sometimes directly into the ornamental vases that decorated the corridors. The palace employed an army of servants whose sole job was to follow the court around with buckets and shovels, cleaning up after the aristocracy, like one might follow a parade of incontinent animals. But there were never enough servants to keep up with the volume of waste being produced, which meant that the floors of Versailles were perpetually slick with urine and dotted with human feces that would be ground into the expensive carpets and marble floors by thousands of passing feet. Visitors to the palace reported that the stench was so overwhelming that they could smell Versailles from miles away, a miasma of human waste, rotting food, unwashed bodies, and the cloying perfumes used to mask it all that hung over the estate like a toxic cloud. The practice of relieving oneself anywhere and everywhere wasn't limited to France. It was a Europe-wide phenomenon that turned every royal palace into a health hazard. At Hampton Court in England, the walls of the palace were regularly found to be stained with urine, and the staircases had to be cleaned weekly to remove the layers of excrement that accumulated on the steps. King Henry VIII's Hampton Court had designated grooms of the stool, servants whose honored position was to attend the king during his bowel movements, wipe his royal posterior, and dispose of the results. But this was a privilege reserved only for the monarch. Everyone else was on their own, leading to the creative use of chamber pots that would be dumped out of windows into the courtyards below, sometimes landing on unfortunate passers-by who learned to walk close to buildings and avoid looking up. The moats surrounding many European castles weren't just defensive structures. They were open sewers, filled with the accumulated waste of everyone inside the walls, mixed with dead animals, spoiled food, and occasionally the bodies of executed criminals. The smell emanating from these moats during summer months was reportedly strong enough to make visitors vomit, and the water itself would turn black and bubble with the gases produced by decomposition. The royal bedchambers were their own special kind of nightmare, festering breeding grounds for every parasite and disease imaginable. Beds in royal households were massive affairs, piled with layers of fabric, stuffed with materials ranging from wool to straw to feathers, and almost never cleaned in any meaningful way. These beds became ecosystems unto themselves, hosting populations of bedbugs, lice, fleas, and mites that would feast on the sleeping occupants night after night. Bed curtains, those elaborate fabric enclosures designed to provide privacy and warmth, trap heat and moisture, creating perfect conditions for bacterial growth and ensuring that anyone sleeping within was essentially marinating in their own sweat and the accumulated exhalations of previous sleepers. Royal beds were passed down through generations, accumulating decades worth of bodily fluids, skin cells, hair, and the corpses of countless parasites that died in the fabric and slowly decomposed within the mattress stuffing. When King Louis XIII of France died, his bed was examined and found to contain not just the expected population of insects, but also several mice that had burrowed into the stuffing and made nests among the down feathers. The practice of sleeping multiple people to a bed common, even among nobility, when space was tight, meant that diseases spread with remarkable efficiency, passed from body to body through the shared fabric and the parasites that traveled between sleeping partners. Menstruation presented its own set of challenges in an era that viewed bodily functions with a mixture of superstition and disgust, particularly when those functions were uniquely female. Royal women during their periods would use folded rags or pieces of linen held in place by belts or simply tucked into their undergarments, creating makeshift pads that would quickly become saturated and then continue to be worn for hours or even days, because changing them frequently was considered wasteful and vain. These menstrual rags would be rinsed out in cold water hot. Water was believed to set the stains permanently and reused month after month, year after year, accumulating bacteria with each cycle. The blood-soaked fabric would be dried and stored in the women's chambers, often in the same trunks where they kept their clean clothing, meaning everything smelled faintly of old blood and the particular metallic organic scent of menstruation. Royal physicians believed that menstrual blood was toxic waste that the female body needed to expel, and that contact with menstruating women could curdle milk, spoil wine, and cause crops to fail, leading to the isolation of noble ladies during their periods in special chambers where they would sit in their own blood and wait for their bodies to finish this monthly purge. Queen Catherine de' Medici of France reportedly kept detailed records of her daughters-in-law's menstrual cycles, demanding that the bloodied linens be shown to her as proof that the women were pregnant, a humiliating ritual that combined medical surveillance with the absolute lack of privacy that defined royal life. The teeth of European royalty tell their own horror story of decay and negligence, rotting monuments to the complete absence of dental hygiene in an age that considered sugar a luxury worth dying for, and they did die for it slowly and painfully. The aristocracy consumed massive quantities of sugar in their elaborate desserts and sweetmeats, but never brushed their teeth or made any attempt to remove the sticky residue that would coat their mouths after every meal. Instead, they would use toothpicks made of gold or silver, expensive implements that did nothing except push the rot deeper between their teeth while allowing them to feel sophisticated. Queen Elizabeth's teeth turned black from decay, and by the time she reached old age, most of them had fallen out or had to be extracted without anesthesia, just a strong man with pliers and a firm grip pulling rotted teeth from swollen infected gums while the queen screamed and bled into a basin. French courtiers would stuff their mouths with cloves or chew on herbs to mask the smell of their rotting teeth, creating an aromatic veneer over the fundamental decay happening inside their skulls. Some nobles had so many rotten teeth extracted that their faces began to collapse inward, giving them a sunken, skeletal appearance that no amount of makeup could disguise. The infection from dental decay would often spread to the jawbone and then into the bloodstream, causing fevers, abscesses, and sometimes death, a fate that befell numerous members of European nobility who essentially rotted from the comb, mouth inward while still alive.